The hospital room was silent, except for the faint hum of machines and the occasional rustle of sheets. Jason lay in the bed, his body paralyzed from the waist down, the result of an explosion that had torn apart his life during a military mission months before. The remnants of his once powerful, disciplined body now betrayed him, unable to move, to fight. His life now, a series of quiet hospital rooms and rehabilitation, was only punctuated by his memories and the ever-present shadow of the war he had fought. At the foot of the bed, Echo, the aging service dog, slept soundly, his body curled into a comfortable ball. His once sharp senses and boundless energy had been dulled by age, but the loyalty in his chest, the unspoken bond between him and Jason, had only grown stronger with time. Echo was no longer the young, agile combat canine he had been, but he still carried the battle scars from years of service. He had never left Jason's side, not once, even when the war had ended for them both. The stillness of the room was deceptive. It was a calm, serene night, the kind where nothing seemed out of place. But something shifted in the air, a subtle tension that neither Jason nor Echo could ignore. Echo's ears twitched, his eyes snapping open, a low growl emanating from deep in his chest. The hairs along his spine bristled, his instinct honed by years of combat, alerting him to something, someone, close by. Jason's body stiffened, the sensation of danger creeping into his mind like a cold wave. His heart, though weakened by months of recovery, quickened, the familiar adrenaline rush flooding his system. He couldn't move, couldn't defend himself, but he had something that no one could take from him. Echo, the dog, his loyal protector, the one thing he could still count on. The door to the room creaked open. The sound was barely audible, but Echo heard it. The scent of two strangers, intruders, mingled with the sterile air. The soft shuffle of footsteps, silent, deliberate. They had come for him. Jason knew it in an instant. The high-profile trial, the government secrets he possessed, the mercenaries, had come to silence him before the trial could even begin. Echo rose to his feet, the motion slow but purposeful. His body ached with the toll of years and injuries, but the old warrior did not falter. He positioned himself between Jason and the door, his eyes locked on the shadows. His instincts were sharp, honed over years of protecting Jason, of defending him against threats in war zones. This was no different, and Echo was prepared. Jason, despite his paralyzed body, could feel the weight of the moment. He could feel Echo's presence, the strength that radiated from the dog, the unspoken promise that nothing would harm him. But Jason was helpless. He could do nothing but watch as his protector faced down the danger. The first intruder stepped into the room, his face hidden in shadow. He was tall, lean, and moved with the precision of someone who had been trained to kill. The second figure followed, bulkier, carrying a heavy bag that Jason immediately recognized. A weapon, no doubt. Their eyes flicked toward the bed, but they were unaware of Echo's position. Echo growled again, low and dangerous, a warning that would have sent any trained soldier into a defensive stance. The intruders hesitated for a moment, realizing they were not alone. Then the attack came. The first intruder lunged forward, a knife glinting in his hand. But Echo was already there, moving with a speed and force that defied his age. He collided with the intruder, knocking the knife out of his grasp and sending him crashing to the floor with a grunt. The sound of bones hitting the ground reverberated through the room. The second intruder, momentarily caught off guard, pulled a gun from his jacket. The cold metallic click of the weapon being readied was deafening. But Echo, faster than anyone could have predicted, was already on him. His teeth sank into the man's arm, forcing him to drop the gun. The man howled in pain, trying to push Echo away, but the dog's grip was unrelenting. Echo fought with the desperation of a soldier who knew that failure was not an option. Jason's breath caught in his throat, the tension of the moment threatening to suffocate him. He was powerless to help, to stop the intruders, but he wasn't alone. Echo was there, always there, and in that moment, the bond between them was a force greater than any enemy. The fight raged on. Echo was older now, his movements slower than they had once been. But the dog's training was ingrained. His body may have been weaker, but his spirit, his loyalty, remained unbroken. He fought tooth and nail to keep the intruders from reaching. Jason, his body taking blow after blow, his fur matted with blood, but he never relented. The first intruder managed to scramble to his feet, pulling a second weapon from his belt, but before he could raise it, Echo was on him again, knocking him off balance and sending him crashing to the ground. The second intruder, bloodied and bruised, was still struggling to free himself from Echo's grip, but it was clear the dog had already won. Jason, desperate, reached out with his hand, pushing the emergency button by his bedside with all the strength he could muster. The signal would reach the hospital's security, but would they get there in time? Echo's body heaved with exhaustion, his muscles trembling as he stood guard, his eyes never leaving the men who had dared to threaten his handler. They were outmatched. The intruders, wounded and disoriented, had no chance against a dog who had fought wars in foreign lands and now fought for the man he loved. With one final desperate attempt, the second intruder managed to pull a syringe from his pocket, a syringe filled with poison intended for Jason. But before he could administer the lethal dose, Echo pounced. His teeth sunk deep into the man's wrist, and with a sharp snap, the syringe fell to the floor, useless. The sounds of distant footsteps echoed through the hallway as security arrived, their shouts filling the air. They flooded the room, overpowering the remaining threat. The intruders were subdued, handcuffed, and dragged from the room, but the damage had been done. Jason, though physically unharmed, was shaken to his core. Echo lay beside him, bloodied and battered, his breathing shallow but steady. Jason's heart ached with a gratitude too deep for words. The dog had saved his life. Once again, Echo had proven that there was no bond stronger than the one they shared, and as the security personnel worked quickly to assess the situation and clean up the aftermath, Jason could do nothing but lie there, looking at his faithful companion. Echo's body was bruised, his movements slow and labored, but the dog remained by his side. The bond between them was unspoken, yet it spoke volumes. In that moment, there was no need for words. They had survived. Together. The hospital room was quieter now, though the air still carried the remnants of the chaos that had unfolded. The silence was suffocating in its own way, the tension of the night hanging heavily around Jason and Echo. The intruders had been taken away, their presence no longer a threat. Security personnel moved swiftly, making sure the room was cleared, and that everything was accounted for. But for Jason, the world outside the room had fallen away. There was only one thing that mattered now. Echo. Echo lay beside the bed, his body still, though his chest rose and fell with labored breaths. The dog's eyes were half closed, his once sharp gaze now clouded with exhaustion and pain. Blood matted his fur, his legs shaking as he struggled to hold himself upright, but still he remained by Jason's side. Jason's hands, still paralyzed, could do nothing to comfort his companion. He could not stroke Echo's fur, could not offer the words of reassurance that the dog deserved. He felt helpless in the worst possible way, not because of his own situation, but because he couldn't offer Echo anything in return for the immense act of loyalty that had just been displayed. As the minutes stretched on, the sound of approaching footsteps signaled the arrival of more medical personnel. The nurses and doctors moved in with practiced efficiency, tending to Echo's injuries. They worked quickly to clean his wounds, to administer pain relief, but Jason barely noticed them. His eyes remained fixed on Echo, his mind racing with thoughts and emotions that he couldn't quite articulate. For so long, Jason had been the protector, the soldier, the one who fought for his country, for those who couldn't fight for themselves. But now in this room, he was the one who had needed protection, and Echo had given him that. The dog had fought, had bled, had risked everything to keep him safe. Jason could never repay him for that, could never truly express how deep the gratitude ran. Echo's eyes flickered open briefly, catching Jason's gaze. The briefest flicker of recognition passed between them, the bond they shared as unspoken and as powerful as it had ever been. Echo's tail, weak but still responsive, gave a small, slow wag. It wasn't much, but it was enough. In that moment, it was the world. The nurses worked efficiently, their voices low and respectful as they moved around the room. They offered Jason soft words of comfort, telling him everything would be okay, but he barely heard them. His focus never wavered. He only had eyes for the dog. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the medical staff stepped back, satisfied that Echo had been stabilized for the moment. They had done everything they could for him, but Jason knew the real work. Echo's recovery would be a long road. The room quieted again, save for the steady beeping of machines. Jason shifted slightly in his bed, struggling against his own paralysis, wanting to reach out and comfort Echo. He could not move, could not physically do what he so desperately wanted to do. But still, he found a way. His eyes, filled with emotion, locked onto Echo's. There was no need for words, none at all. The two of them had communicated without words for years, through the quiet understanding that existed between them. They had fought side by side, had faced the darkest parts of the world, and now, as Echo lay beside him, Jason realized just how much he relied on that silent bond. In the silence of the room, Jason thought about everything that had led them here. The explosion, the injury that had changed his life, the months of recovery, the loneliness of being paralyzed, of having to depend on others for things he once did for himself. But through all of that, Echo had been there. Never once had the dog left his side. In the quiet aftermath of the attack, it was clear to Jason that Echo wasn't just a service dog. Echo was family. He was more than a partner. He was the one piece of the life Jason had once known that remained. Outside the room, the world continued to turn, oblivious to the battle that had just been fought in the quiet hospital. But in this small, private space, Jason knew the truth. Echo had not only saved his life that night, he had given him something even more precious: hope. Hope that despite everything he had lost, he had not lost his purpose. He had not lost the one person who would always stand beside him. Time passed, and the nurses continued to check on Echo, making sure his vitals were stable. They whispered among themselves, amazed at the dog's resilience, but none of them understood the depth of what Echo had just done. They did not know the bond that Jason and Echo shared. They could not know, but Jason did. And in that knowledge, he found peace. Sorry. Night passed slowly, the hours dragging on in a quiet limbo. Jason's body was still, but his mind was alive, running through the events of the night. The attack, the intruders, Echo's bravery. He could not stop thinking about it. He could not stop feeling the weight of what Echo had done. The doctors would say the worst was over. They would say Echo was stable, that he would recover. But Jason knew that recovery wasn't just about physical healing. It was about trust. It was about the bond they had forged in war, in hardship, in survival. That bond had been tested tonight, and it had held strong. And so, as the night stretched on and the world outside remained unaware, Jason knew one thing for certain. There was nothing that could break the bond between him and his dog. No amount of pain, no amount of danger. They were a team, a family. Together they had faced death. Together they had survived. And together they would continue to face whatever the future held. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe for more stories that speak to the soul.